The laughter came too easily for something that precise. In the center of the Carter living room, beneath warm lights and polite smiles, Kai Carter lifted his glass and spoke as if cruelty were wit. He listed Bailey's weight, her silence, her failures, turning his wife into a public inconvenience. Then, without hesitation, he placed divorce papers in front of her. No one stopped him. Not Eleanor, not Richard. Bailey didn't argue. She didn't look away, because the company Richard had given his life to already belonged to the woman they had just tried to erase. If you believe dignity doesn't need to be loud, stay with this story until the end. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. And if stories like this matter to you, consider subscribing quietly. Bailey Carter had learned over time that silence was often mistaken for absence. In the early years of her marriage, it had not been this way. There had been laughter then, and something that looked like mutual regard. Kai had admired her discipline, the way she listened, more than she spoke, the way she could hold a room without needing to claim it. He used to introduce her with a certain pride, as though her composure reflected well on him. That version of Kai existed long enough to be remembered, but not long enough to matter. The shift had not come all at once. It had arrived in fragments. A comment here delivered lightly, almost joking. A glance there held a second too long when she reached for something sweet at dinner. The first time he mentioned her weight, he had framed it as concern. He said it quietly late at night when the house was still. "You've changed," he had told her not unkindly. "I just want you to feel like yourself again." Bailey had nodded. She had taken the words at face value. At the time, she still believed that care and criticism could occupy the same sentence without canceling each other out. But the tone changed before the words did. Within months, concern became commentary. Commentary became habit. And habit, once it found an audience, became performance. The Carter household was not a place where things went unnoticed. Eleanor Carter, precise in both posture and opinion, carried her judgments the way some women carry jewelry, visible, intentional, never accidental. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "You might consider something more structured," Eleanor had said once, passing Bailey a plate already smaller than everyone else's. "Discipline reflects in every area of life." It was said gently. It was heard clearly. Richard Carter rarely intervened. He occupied his seat at the table with the steady presence of someone who believed stability was a form of kindness. He listened, nodded, and returned to his meals. If he noticed the shift in tone directed at Bailey, he gave no indication that it required correction. Kai, however, noticed everything. And he learned quickly what drew laughter. At first, he waited for openings. A pause in conversation. A comment from someone else. He would add a line, something small, something that could be dismissed as humor if challenged. When no one challenged him, he expanded. By the second year, he no longer waited. "You remember when she used to run every morning?" he said once, smiling at a cousin across the table. "Now she negotiates with the couch." The room had responded with polite laughter. Not loud, not cruel, but enough. Bailey had been sitting beside him when he said it. She had been holding a glass of water, her fingers steady, her posture unchanged. She did not interrupt. She did not correct him. She let the moment pass through her as if it belonged to someone else. It did not go unnoticed. Silence, when held consistently, begins to take shape. Becomes a presence of its own. People react to it, even if they cannot name why. Kai interpreted it as permission. Outside the house, his behavior sharpened. At a small gathering with colleagues, he introduced Bailey as someone who used to have a much busier schedule. The phrasing drew curiosity. When someone asked what she did now, he answered for her. "She focuses on the home," he said. "It's less demanding." Bailey had stood beside him, listening. She had watched the shift in the room, the recalibration of how others saw her. It was subtle but precise. Respect redirected. Attention reassigned. She made no effort to reclaim it. That night after they returned home, Kai did not apologize. He did not reference the moment at all. For him, it had already been resolved by its own lack of consequence. Bailey did not confront him. Instead, she opened her laptop. The document she had started weeks earlier remained where she had left it. It was not labeled with emotion. It carried no adjectives, no interpretations, only dates, times, and exact language. She added a new entry. Location: private residence, Westchester County. Event: professional gathering. Statement. She focuses on the home. It's less demanding. Witnesses 6. She saved the document without reviewing it. This was how she worked now, not in reaction, but in accumulation. There were other records, messages preserved in their original form. Comments sent late at night when Kai assumed tone would soften the words. Financial summaries downloaded and stored. Medical documentation organized chronologically, detailing the period in which her body had changed under conditions that had nothing to do with indulgence and everything to do with survival. She did not revisit these files often. She did not need to. Their existence was enough. What mattered was continuity. Kai, unaware of any of this, continued as he had begun. He started declining invitations that included her by default. When pressed, he explained that she preferred to stay in. When she attended anyway, he created distance through absence, physically present, but never beside her long enough to be seen as aligned. Eleanor approved of this, though she never said so directly. "There is a way to present oneself," she remarked one afternoon, adjusting a vase in the sitting room. "It reflects on everyone connected to you." Bailey, seated nearby, acknowledged the statement with a slight nod. She did not ask for clarification. Richard entered midway through the exchange, his tie loosened slightly after a long day. He greeted Bailey first, a habit he had maintained since the beginning. There was no tension in his voice, no edge to his words. If he sensed the undercurrent in the room, he chose not to disturb it. "How was your day?" he asked her. "Productive," Bailey replied. It was the same answer she gave, the same every time. It was also the only one that was entirely true. In the weeks that followed, Kai's behavior shifted again, not in direction, but in confidence. What had once required subtlety now operated without restraint. He corrected her in front of others. He dismissed her suggestions before they were fully spoken. He referenced her body as though it were a shared inconvenience, rather than a private reality. And each time, Bailey did the same thing. She listened. She remembered. She recorded. There was a moment late one evening when Kai stood in the kitchen scrolling through his phone, unaware that she had entered the room behind him. The screen reflected briefly in the glass of a cabinet door. A name appeared, not one she recognized from his usual circle. Ethan. The conversation moved quickly. Casual, familiar. Not hidden, but not offered either. Bailey did not step closer. She did not interrupt. She turned away before the reflection could shift. Later that night, after Kai had gone to bed, she accessed the shared account records. The process was methodical. No urgency. No visible concern. There were entries she had not seen before. Small transfers at first, amounts unlikely to draw attention. Then larger ones spaced irregularly, directed toward accounts that did not belong to their household. She documented each one. Date, amount, destination. No conclusions. Not yet, just facts. The pattern was not complete, but it was forming. Bailey closed the file and shut down her laptop. In the quiet that followed, the house felt unchanged. The same walls, the same carefully arranged spaces, the same voices that would fill it again in the morning, carrying the same assumptions. Nothing on the surface had shifted. But Bailey no longer measured reality by what could be seen. She had learned to recognize the weight of things that moved underneath. And she had already begun to position herself accordingly. Long before Bailey Carter became a presence that others overlooked, she had learned how to build structures that could not be easily seen. It was not something she spoke about, not because it was secret, but because it required a kind of explanation that most people were not prepared to hear without misunderstanding. Power, when quiet, often appears like absence, and Bailey had never been interested in correcting that perception unless it served a purpose. She had not entered her marriage with nothing. She had entered it with restraint. Years earlier, before she met Kai, Bailey had been part of a legal and financial team that specialized in corporate acquisitions. Not the kind that made headlines, but the kind that rewrote ownership from the inside out. She understood how companies moved, how control shifted through layers of entities that never appeared in the same room together. She knew how to build a structure that looked stable from the outside, while quietly changing everything beneath it. The company Richard Carter worked for had not always been what it was now. At the time Richard joined, it was a mid-sized operation with predictable growth and conservative leadership. He had built his career there, slowly, steadily, with a kind of loyalty that did not question direction. For years, that loyalty had been rewarded just enough to keep him invested. Then, over the course of 18 months, things began to change. New policies were introduced. Departments were reorganized. Leadership shifted in ways that seemed gradual, almost natural. To someone like Richard, who focused on execution rather than origin, these changes felt like progress. He did not see the acquisition as it happened. Very few people did. The purchase was not executed under a single name. It moved through a parent entity, then through a holding structure designed to absorb attention without attracting it. Each step was legal. Each step was documented. But the connections between them required a level of attention that most employees did not have the time or the reason to pursue. Bailey had overseen that structure, not publicly, not in meetings where her name would be recorded, but in the quiet exchanges where decisions were made before they were presented as conclusions. She had reviewed the terms, adjusted the sequence, approved the final transfer of control. By the time the company announced its new ownership, the identity of that ownership had already been placed at a distance. A board, a trust, a set of names that meant something on paper and nothing in conversation. Bailey's name did not appear. That had been intentional. When she met Kai, the acquisition had already been complete. The structure was in place. The company was operating under its new direction, and Richard Carter continued to report to leadership that had in effect been approved by the woman he would later welcome into his family without recognition. Bailey hadn't planned it that way, but she had not corrected it either. There had been a moment early in her relationship with Kai when the connection could have been made clear. He had mentioned his father's work casually with a kind of distant pride that did not expect detail. "It's stable," he had said. "Good company. My dad's been there forever." Bailey had asked a few questions, enough to confirm what she already suspected. She had not said more. At the time, she believed the omission would protect something. A version of their relationship that could exist without hierarchy, without the distortion that comes when one person knows exactly how much influence the other holds. She had chosen to remain undefined. That choice had extended into the marriage. She did not correct assumptions about her schedule. When people asked what she did, she gave answers that were technically true, but structurally incomplete. "I work remotely," she would say. "I consult when needed." Both statements were accurate. Neither revealed the scale of her involvement. Kai had accepted these answers at first. He had even admired them, interpreting her discretion as focus rather than concealment. In those early months, he had told people that his wife kept things simple. It was only later that simplicity became in his language absence. The shift did not occur in isolation. It coincided with changes in Bailey's health that required her attention in ways that were not visible from the outside. medical consultations, adjustments in treatment, periods of fatigue that interrupted her routine. She adapted quietly. Her work did not stop. It changed shape. Instead of attending meetings in person, she reviewed materials in advance. Instead of leading discussions, she guided them through written directives. Her involvement remained consistent, even as her visibility decreased. Inside the company, this was not unusual. Leadership in its higher forms often operates without constant presence. Decisions are made in layers. Authority is distributed, then recollected at critical points. Bailey understood this. She had designed parts of it. Outside the company, however, absence was interpreted differently. Kai began to notice what she no longer did, rather than what she continued to manage. He measured her value by visible activity, by movement, by output he could recognize without needing explanation. When those markers changed, his perception followed. By the time he started questioning her, Bailey had already adjusted to the new structure of her life. She had accepted that certain explanations would not be heard in the way they were intended. That some truths once spoken would not be received as neutral information, but as imbalance. So she said nothing. She allowed the misinterpretation to settle, not as surrender, but as delay. There were legal reasons for this as well. The structure through which she held ownership of the company was bound by agreements that required discretion. Public disclosure, especially in a personal context, could trigger obligations she had no intention of activating prematurely. Daniel Brooks had been clear about that. In a divorce, he had told her during one of their earlier meetings, everything becomes relevant. Not just what you own, but how it's structured, how it was acquired, and who can claim knowledge of it. Bailey had listened. What would trigger disclosure, she asked. Conflict, Daniel replied. If the other party challenges the division of assets, or if there's any indication of concealed interests that affect valuation. Bailey considered that. And if there's no challenge, then we proceed with what's presented, Daniel said. But you should assume that once this begins, the scope will expand. She had understood the implication. Kai's decision to file for divorce was not just a personal act. It was a legal mechanism that would eventually intersect with everything she had chosen to keep separate. That intersection had not happened yet. But it was approaching. Bailey closed the file in front of her and leaned back slightly in her chair. The room around her was quiet, organized, unchanged. On the surface, her life remained exactly as it had been the day before. Inside, however, the positions were already shifting. Not dramatically, not visibly, but with the kind of precision that does not require attention to be effective. Kai believed he was moving first. Bailey allowed him to keep that belief. For now, the distance between Kai Carter's words and his intent had disappeared. There had been a time when his remarks carried a thin layer of hesitation, as if some part of him still recognized a boundary he was not entirely ready to cross. That hesitation was gone now. What remained was clarity. Not the kind that illuminated truth, but the kind that revealed character without needing to explain it. It showed most clearly when there was an audience. Kai had developed an instinct for timing. He knew when a room was relaxed enough to accept a comment without resistance, when attention was scattered just enough that no one would feel responsible for intervening. In those moments, he would speak. At a dinner hosted by one of his colleagues, the table was arranged with deliberate symmetry. Conversations moved easily between business updates and polite observations. Bailey sat to his right, composed, her posture steady, her presence unremarkable in the way it had become. The topic shifted to routines, exercise, work-life balance, the small disciplines people use to maintain control over their lives. Kai smiled. Some routines don't survive marriage, he said, lifting his glass slightly. Or maybe they just get replaced. A few people chuckled, uncertain of the direction. He continued, Bailey used to be consistent, he added. Now she's flexible. The word lingered longer than it should have. Someone across the table attempted to redirect the conversation, but the shift had already taken place. The focus had moved. Not entirely, not permanently, but enough. Bailey did not respond. She reached for her water, took a measured sip, and returned the glass to the table with the same care she applied to everything else. Her expression did not change. She did not meet Kai's eyes. She did not offer the room an alternative narrative. She allowed the moment to settle exactly where it had been placed. Later, as they walked to the car, Kai seemed satisfied. "You're too quiet in those settings," he said, unlocking the door. "People don't know what to do with that." Bailey entered the passenger seat without answering. "They expect engagement," he continued. "It reflects on both of us." The engine started. The conversation ended. For Kai, the absence of resistance confirmed correctness. He interpreted Bailey's silence as agreement, or at least as acceptance. The distinction did not matter to him. At home, the pattern repeated in smaller ways. He commented on what she ate, on how long she stayed in one place, on the way she moved through rooms that he had begun to treat as exclusively his. Each observation carried the same underlying message delivered with increasing efficiency. You are less than you were. Eleanor reinforced it with precision. One afternoon, while reviewing a set of invitations at the dining table, she paused over Bailey's name. "You may want to consider something more tailored," Eleanor said without looking up. "Certain silhouettes are less forgiving." Bailey, seated across from her, followed the line of thought without asking for clarification. "I'll consider it," she replied. Eleanor nodded, once satisfied, not with the answer, but with the lack of resistance. Richard entered shortly after placing his briefcase near the door. His presence shifted the room slightly, though not enough to alter its direction. "Evening," he said, loosening his tie. Bailey acknowledged him first. "Good evening." Richard returned the greeting with a brief smile before taking his seat. He asked about her day, as he always did. The question remained unchanged, even as everything else moved around it. Productive, Bailey answered. He nodded, accepting the response without probing further. Kai arrived later, bringing with him the energy of someone who believed movement equaled progress. He spoke about meetings, about opportunities, about people who recognized his potential. His narrative had become increasingly centered on expansion, on the idea that he was on the verge of something larger. Bailey listened. There were details in his accounts that did not align, names mentioned casually that appeared elsewhere in contexts he had not disclosed, timelines that overlapped in ways that suggested omission rather than coincidence, references to financial decisions that had not passed through any of the accounts she monitored. She did not question him, not yet. Instead, she returned to her records. The document had grown, not dramatically, but consistently. Each entry added weight not through interpretation, but through repetition. Patterns once established did not require explanation. She updated it that night. Location: private residence, colleague dinner. Statement: now she's flexible. Context: group setting 8 attendees. Response: none. She moved to the financial file next. The transactions she had noted earlier had expanded. Additional transfers appeared spaced irregularly but connected by destination. The accounts receiving them were not in Kai's name, nor were they associated with any joint obligation. She traced them as far as the available data allowed. Each step remained within legal boundaries. She did not access anything she was not permitted to see. She did not make assumptions beyond what could be supported. But the pattern was becoming clearer. Kai was moving money, not recklessly, not in a way that would trigger immediate scrutiny, but deliberately enough to suggest intention. Bailey documented each instance. Date, amount, account reference. No commentary. She closed the file and sat for a moment, the quiet of the room settling around her. Upstairs, Kai moved through the house with the confidence of someone who believed control was a matter of volume. Doors opened and closed. Footsteps marked territory rather than transition. Bailey did not respond to the sound. Her focus remained where it had been since the beginning, not on the noise, but on the structure beneath it. There was a difference between what was visible and what was binding. Kai operated in the visible. He shaped perception, adjusted narratives, and relied on immediate reaction to validate his position. His influence existed in real time, sustained by attention. Bailey operated elsewhere. She worked in accumulation, in records that did not require acknowledgement to remain valid, in timelines that could be reconstructed without relying on memory, in structures that held their form regardless of who believed in them. The company Richard served continued its operations without interruption. Policies were implemented, reviews were scheduled, communications were distributed through channels that appeared routine to those receiving them. Bailey reviewed those communications as part of her regular process. One notice in particular required attention. An internal audit focused on data access and financial compliance. The departments listed included Richard's. Bailey read the document twice, not for content, but for sequence. The audit had been planned weeks in advance. Its scope was defined broadly enough to encompass multiple areas without singling out any individual. It was procedural. It was also precise. She forwarded the notice to Daniel Brooks with a brief message. Timeline aligns. No action required. His response came shortly after. Understood. Maintain position. Bailey closed the exchange and set the phone aside. Across the house, Kai's voice carried faintly through the walls as he spoke to someone on the phone. The tone was relaxed, familiar, confident in a way that suggested he believed himself unobserved. Bailey did not move to listen more closely. She did not need to. What mattered was already in place. The patterns were forming. The records were complete enough to support the next step, though she had not yet decided when that step would be taken. Timing, she had learned, was not about speed. It was about alignment. Kai believed he was building a case. Bailey allowed that belief to remain intact. For now, it served her. By the time the next family gathering was arranged, the pattern no longer needed to announce itself. It arrived with them. The Carter house had been prepared with the same careful attention as always. Eleanor moved through each room with quiet efficiency, adjusting details that few would notice, but everyone would feel. The table was set long before anyone arrived. The lighting was softened just enough to flatter, not enough to conceal. Bailey entered with Kai, her presence steady, her movements measured. She greeted Eleanor first, then Richard, then the extended family members who had already begun to settle into their roles for the evening. No one mentioned the previous gathering. They did not need to. Kai took his place at the head of the table without discussion. It was not his seat by tradition, but it had become his by repetition. Richard allowed it. Eleanor did not challenge it. Bailey sat where she was expected to sit. To Kai's right, visible but secondary, conversation began with familiar topics: work, travel, small updates that required little investment and offered even less risk. For a time, the evening moved without disruption. Then the subject shifted. A cousin mentioned a wellness program she had recently joined. Structured meals, regular training, a return, she said, to something she had lost. Kai smiled. "You're lucky you caught it early," he said. "It's harder to reverse once it settles." The statement hovered, not yet directed. He turned slightly. "Bailey's been exploring that," he added. "In theory." The table responded with a ripple of polite amusement. Bailey did not look up. She adjusted her napkin, aligned her utensils, and remained exactly where she was. Kai continued. "It's about discipline," he said, as though offering a general principle. "Some people maintain it. Some people adapt." The word landed with the same careful imprecision he had used before, enough to suggest not enough to be challenged without appearing defensive. Eleanor did not intervene. She took a sip of her wine, her expression unchanged. Richard's attention remained on his plate. The conversation shifted again, guided by someone who preferred comfort over correction. The moment passed, as it always did, but not without being recorded. Bailey's memory did not rely on emotion. It relied on structure. She noted the phrasing, the sequence, the witnesses. Not immediately. Not at the table. Later. Dinner continued. Courses were served and cleared. Stories were exchanged. Laughter returned lighter now, unburdened by the tension it had briefly acknowledged. Kai grew more animated as the evening progressed. His voice carried more easily. His confidence expanded in proportion to the room's willingness to accommodate it. At one point, he spoke about his future. "There are opportunities opening up," he said, leaning back slightly. "I've been in discussions. Nothing formal yet, but it's moving." Richard looked up at that. "With your current firm?" he asked. Adjacent Kai replied. "There are connections. People who see where things are going." He did not elaborate. He did not need to. The implication was enough. Bailey listened. There were names embedded in his statements that she recognized, not from personal introduction, but from documents. Internal communications, the kind that did not circulate outside specific channels. She did not ask how he knew them. She did not need to. After dinner, as the room dispersed into smaller conversations, Bailey stepped into the kitchen. The space was quiet for a moment, removed from the noise of the main room. She opened her phone. The document remained as she had left it. Organized, precise, unemotional. She added a new entry. Location: Carter residence family dinner. Statement: Bailey's been exploring that. In theory. Follow-up. Some people maintain it. Some people adapt. Witnesses multiple, including immediate family. She saved the file. Then she moved to the financial records. The pattern she had been tracking had extended again. New transactions, similar structure, same destination cluster. She cross-referenced dates with known events, meetings Kai had mentioned, evenings he had returned later than expected, conversations that had ended abruptly when she entered the room. The alignment was not perfect, but it was sufficient. Bailey did not interpret the data beyond what it showed. She did not assign motive, not yet. Footsteps approached. She locked her phone and placed it on the counter. Eleanor entered carrying a tray. "You left the table early," she observed. For a moment, Bailey replied. Eleanor set the tray down with care. "You should try to remain engaged," she said. "It helps avoid misinterpretation." Bailey met her gaze briefly. "I understand." Eleanor studied her for a second longer, as though expecting something more. When nothing came, she turned back to the tray. There was nothing in Bailey's expression to confirm or deny anything. That absence had become its own form of resistance. Later, as guests began to leave, Richard stood near the door, offering the same measured farewell to each person. When Bailey approached, he paused. "Good to see you," he said. "And you?" she replied. There was a moment, brief, almost imperceptible, where he seemed to consider saying more. Then it passed. Kai joined her at the door. "We'll head out," he said, not waiting for response. The drive home was quiet, not tense, not reflective, simply absent of conversation. Kai did not revisit the evening. For him, it had unfolded as expected. There was nothing to analyze, nothing to correct. Bailey watched the road ahead. Streetlights passed at regular intervals, marking time without altering direction. When they arrived, Kai went upstairs immediately. His movements were efficient, purposeful. He had learned to occupy space in a way that left little room for others to question it. Bailey remained downstairs. She opened her laptop. The financial file expanded under her attention. Each entry confirmed the last. Each connection strengthened the pattern. She accessed the shared account interface again. There were permissions she held that Kai did not consider, not because they were hidden, but because he had never needed to look for them. The transfer history extended further back than he realized. Bailey traced it, step by step. The earliest transactions were small, easily dismissed, the kind that could be explained without scrutiny. Then they increased, not dramatically, not enough to trigger automatic alerts, but enough. She documented everything. Then she opened a separate folder, medical records, chronological, verified, complete. Dates aligned with the period Kai had referenced most often, the time he described as decline, the phase he used to define her. The records told a different story. Treatments, consultations, diagnoses that required adjustment, not judgment. Bailey reviewed them once, not for confirmation, but for readiness. She closed the file and leaned back. Upstairs, the house settled into stillness. The same walls, the same structure, nothing had changed. Not yet. But Bailey no longer needed change to be visible to understand that it had begun. Kai believed he was shaping the narrative. Bailey was assembling the record. And records once complete do not require interpretation to be understood. They only require the right moment to be seen. Kai Carter chose a weekday morning. Not because it mattered, but because it didn't. There was a particular kind of confidence in selecting an ordinary moment for something irreversible. It suggested control. It suggested that the outcome had already been decided somewhere beyond the need for ceremony. Bailey noticed the change before he said anything. He moved differently that morning. Not faster, not slower, just with a level of intention that replaced the usual rhythm of habit. He checked his phone more often, paused between tasks as if confirming a sequence only he could see. He left the house without explanation. Bailey did not ask where he was going. By midday, the email arrived. Subject line: Petition for dissolution of marriage. It was not sent directly from Kai. It came through legal channels formatted with the neutrality that transforms personal decisions into procedural actions. The language was precise, controlled, designed to carry weight without emotion. To Bailey opened the document. She read it once without interruption. Then she read it again. The content followed a familiar structure. Statements of incompatibility, assertions of irreconcilable differences. Requests for equitable distribution framed in a way that suggested imbalance, though none was explicitly proven, but it was the characterization that drew her attention. The petition described her as withdrawn, dependent, lacking in contribution to the shared life they had built. It referenced her health not as a condition, but as a limitation. It implied instability without naming it directly. Each phrase had been chosen carefully, not to state facts, but to shape perception. Bailey did not react outwardly. She placed the document on the table, aligned its edges with the surface, and sat for a moment without moving. There was no urgency in her stillness, only assessment. Her phone vibrated shortly after. Daniel Brooks. "I've received a copy," he said when she answered. His tone was even unaffected by the content. "Have you reviewed it?" "Yes." "Initial impressions, structured," Bailey replied. "Intentional." Daniel paused, then continued. "They're positioning early," he said. "Establishing a narrative before discovery begins." "I see that." "There are inaccuracies," he added. "We'll address them. But we don't respond immediately. Not with everything." Bailey understood. Timing was not about speed. It was about sequence. "What's the timeline?" she asked. "We acknowledge receipt within the required window," Daniel said. "Then we begin the response. Measured, documented. We let them extend first." Bailey glanced at the document again. "They've already extended," she said. "Yes," Daniel replied, "but not fully." The distinction mattered. A partial extension revealed intent. A full extension revealed vulnerability. Bailey closed the document. "I'll prepare my notes," she said. "Send everything you have," Daniel replied. "And Bailey." He stopped as though considering whether to complete the thought. "Don't engage directly," he finished. "Not yet. I won't." The call ended. Upstairs, the house remained unchanged. The same quiet. The same arrangement of objects that suggested stability without guaranteeing it. Bailey opened her laptop. The document she had been maintaining expanded under her attention. She did not begin with the new filing. She began earlier. She moved through each entry, verifying dates, confirming wording, ensuring that every detail aligned with what could be proven. There was no room for approximation. No space for interpretation beyond what the record could support. When she reached the present, she added a new section: legal filing petition for dissolution. Filed by Kai Carter. Date timestamp. Summary characterization of respondent as dependent, non-contributing, unstable. She did not respond to the claims within the document. Not in that file. That would come later through the appropriate channel. Next, she opened the financial records. The transactions she had been tracking continued up to the previous week. There were no new entries since then. That absence in itself was a change. It suggested awareness, not necessarily of her observation, but of exposure. Kai had paused. Bailey noted the gap. Date range, no activity. Interpretation, potential shift in behavior. Again, no conclusions, only structure. She moved to her medical records. The documentation was complete. Verified by professionals. Time-stamped. Immune to reinterpretation when presented correctly. She reviewed the sections that corresponded with the period referenced in Kai's filing. The contrast between his description and the clinical reality was not subtle. But Bailey did not rely on contrast. She relied on evidence. The files were organized into a separate folder prepared for transfer when required. She closed it. The afternoon passed without interruption. Kai returned home later than usual. His expression carried the same confidence he had displayed in the morning, though now it was tempered by anticipation. He was waiting for something. A reaction. Bailey was in the living room when he entered. Seated, composed. A book open in her hands. He paused when he saw her. "You got it," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," Bailey replied. He stepped further into the room, placing his keys on the table. "I think it's the right move," he continued. "For both of us." Bailey turned a page. "I've reviewed it," she said. Kai waited. There was a silence that extended just long enough to create discomfort, though not long enough to justify interruption. That's all he asked. Bailey looked up. "For now," she said. The answer did not satisfy him. It was not meant to. "I expected more," he said, "given everything." Bailey held his gaze for a moment, then returned to her book. "Then you expected incorrectly." Kai exhaled a short, controlled release of frustration. "This doesn't have to be complicated," he said. "We can handle it efficiently if we're aligned." Aligned. The word lingered between them. Bailey closed the book. "Then we'll proceed efficiently," she said. There was no resistance in her tone, no agreement either, only direction. Kai studied her, searching for something he could use to recalibrate his position. An opening, a reaction. anything that would confirm the narrative he had already begun to construct. He found none. "Fine," he said finally. "We'll let the lawyers handle it." Bailey nodded once. That would be appropriate. Kai turned and moved toward the stairs. His steps were measured, but the rhythm had changed. Less certain, less controlled. Bailey remained where she was. When he disappeared from view, she reopened her laptop. There was one more file to prepare, the audio. She had not listened to it again since receiving it. Not because she doubted its content, but because repetition did not strengthen its validity. Verification did. She checked the metadata, the timestamps, the chain of custody provided with the file. Then she forwarded it to Daniel Brooks with a single line, for review. Confirm admissibility. She closed the laptop. The house settled once more into quiet. Above her movement continued subtle, intermittent indicative of someone adjusting to a situation that had not unfolded as expected. Bailey did not follow the sound. She did not need to. The process had begun. Not with emotion, not with confrontation, but with structure. And once set in motion, structure does not respond to volume. It responds to sequence. Kai believed he had taken the first step. Bailey allowed him to keep that belief. For now, the legal process did not begin with confrontation. It began with preparation. Bailey Carter approached it the same way she approached everything else, with structure restraint and a refusal to move before the sequence was clear. The filing Kai had initiated was not an end. It was an opening move, one that assumed she would respond in kind, with equal visibility and equal urgency. She did neither. 3 days after receiving the petition, Bailey met Daniel Brooks in his office downtown. The building itself was understated, designed to convey credibility without spectacle. Glass steel and quiet hallways where conversations were measured not by volume, but by implication. Daniel greeted her with the same calm precision he carried into every interaction. "I've reviewed everything you sent," he said, gesturing toward a folder already arranged on the table. "We have more than enough to proceed. The question is how we want to structure the response." Bailey took her seat. "Sequentially," she said. Daniel nodded once. "That's what I thought." He opened the folder. "We start with the characterization," he continued. "They've built a narrative of dependency and instability. We don't argue that directly. We dismantle it through contradiction." Bailey listened. "Medical documentation first," Daniel said. "Not as defense, but as context. We establish that the period they're referencing corresponds with verifiable treatment." He slid a document across the table. "Then financials. The transfers you identified, they're consistent," Bailey said. "Patterned, not random." "Agreed," Daniel replied. "We present them without interpretation. Let the court draw its own conclusions." Bailey glanced at the figures. There was no emotion attached to them. Only movement, direction, intent implied through repetition. "And the audio?" she asked. Daniel paused. "That's more complex," he said. "It's usable, but we need to be precise about how. It introduces motive, but it also expands the scope." "Into corporate exposure," Bailey said. "Yes." The room held the weight of that for a moment. Bailey did not shift. "Then we sequence it last," she said. "After the foundation is established." Daniel watched her, assessing not the content of her response, but the certainty behind it. "That will escalate things," he said. "It already has," Bailey replied. There was no hesitation in her tone. Daniel closed the folder. "Then we proceed as planned." The meeting lasted less than an hour. No raised voices, no dramatic conclusions, just alignment. When Bailey left the office, the city moved around her with its usual indifference. People passed without recognition. Conversations continued without interruption. Nothing in the environment reflected the shift that had begun. That was how she preferred it. Back at the house, Kai had already started adjusting his position, not outwardly, but in the details. He spent more time on his phone, moving between rooms with a level of focus that suggested coordination. Conversations ended when she entered. Messages were checked, then cleared. The pattern was subtle but consistent. Bailey did not confront him. She observed. That evening, as he stood near the kitchen counter, his voice carried just enough for her to register tone without needing to hear content. Relaxed, confident. He believed the process was moving in his favor. That belief was reinforced the following morning. Melissa Grant, his attorney, had filed an initial motion expanding on the claims in the original petition. The language was sharper now, less neutral, more assertive. Bailey read it without reaction. Daniel had anticipated this. "They'll extend early," he had said. "They'll try to define the narrative before we respond." They had. Bailey forwarded the document to Daniel with a brief note. Received. His reply came shortly after, on schedule. The simplicity of the exchange reflected something larger. Control did not require constant action. It required timing. Bailey returned to her files. The medical records were prepared for submission. Verified, organized, complete. They did not argue. They did not defend. They simply existed in contrast to the claims made against her. The financial records were more intricate. She reviewed the sequence again, tracing the movement of funds through the accounts Kai had used. The destinations remained consistent. The amounts varied, but the pattern held. She cross-referenced dates with his known schedule. Meetings he had mentioned. Evenings he had returned later than expected. Days when his tone had shifted without explanation. The alignment strengthened. Not perfectly, but enough. Bailey documented the connections. No conclusions, only structure. Later that afternoon, she received a message from an unfamiliar number. It contained a single line. "You should know what he's been saying." Attached was a file. Bailey did not open it immediately. She checked the number. Unlisted. No identifying information. She forwarded the message to Daniel. Source unknown. Review before opening. His response was immediate. Do not access. Send metadata. Bailey complied. Within minutes, Daniel called. "We'll handle it through proper channels," he said. "If it's legitimate, we'll secure it. If not, we ignore it." Bailey agreed. She did not need the file. Not yet. What mattered was verification. That evening, Kai returned home earlier than usual. There was a shift in his demeanor. Less certainty. More calculation. He found Bailey in the study, reviewing documents. "We need to talk," he said. Bailey looked up. "About the direction this is going," he replied. "Your response, or lack of one." Bailey closed the file in front of her. "My response is in process," she said. Kai stepped further into the room. "Doesn't look that way," he said. "From where I'm standing, you're not engaging." Bailey met his gaze. "Then your perspective is incomplete." The statement landed without force, but with precision. Kai exhaled. "This doesn't have to escalate," he said. "We can keep it straightforward, clean. Clean. The word suggested simplicity. It also suggested omission. Bailey did not accept either. "Then proceed cleanly," she said. "I am Kai," replied. "I just need you to do the same." Bailey held his gaze for a moment longer. "I am," she repeated. The silence that followed was not empty. It was defined. Kai shifted his weight as though recalibrating. "There are things you don't need to bring into this," he said. "It's just a divorce." Bailey's expression did not change. "Then it will remain one," she said. The answer was neither agreement nor refusal. It was direction. Kai studied her, searching again for an opening. He found none. "Fine," he said. "We'll let it play out." Bailey nodded once. That would be appropriate. Kai turned and left the room. His steps were quieter this time, less certain. Bailey reopened her file. There was one more entry to add. Location residence study. Statement: there are things you don't need to bring into this. Context: direct conversation post-filing. She saved the document. Then she paused, not to reconsider, but to assess. The process was moving. Not quickly, but correctly. Kai believed he was managing the outcome. Bailey allowed that belief to remain intact. For now, it served its purpose. Because when the structure was complete, when every element aligned, the shift would not require explanation. It would simply be seen. Bailey did not listen to the audio immediately, not because she feared what it might contain, but because she understood the difference between possession and admissibility. Information once heard cannot be unheard. But in a legal process, what matters is not what is known. It is what can be proven, introduced, and sustained under scrutiny. Daniel Brooks had already initiated the verification. By the following morning, a preliminary report was waiting in Bailey's inbox. It did not confirm everything, but it confirmed enough. The file was authentic. The timestamps aligned. The source device had been identified with reasonable certainty. The conversation had not been altered in any detectable way. Bailey read the summary once, then opened the audio file. She listened without interruption. Kai's voice came through clearly, relaxed, unguarded in a way he had not been at home for months. There was no tension in his tone, no awareness that the moment might ever be revisited outside the context in which it had occurred. Ethan Cole responded with the familiarity of someone who had heard these thoughts before. "You're overthinking it," Ethan said at one point. "She's not going to push back. She doesn't even know how." Kai laughed. "It's not about pushing back," he replied. "It's about framing it right. If she looks dependent, everything else falls into place." There was a pause. "And the weight thing?" Ethan asked. "It helps," Kai said. "People see it and fill in the rest. Lack of discipline, instability. It writes itself." Bailey did not react. She continued listening. "There's also the situation with my dad," Kai added. "He's still in that company, loyal to a fault." "Does that help you?" Ethan asked. "It can," Kai said. "He hears things, structural changes, internal movement. Nothing formal, but enough to understand direction." "That sounds risky," Ethan replied. Kai dismissed it. "It's indirect," he said, "and it's not like anyone's watching that closely." The conversation moved on, after that shifting into other topics that carried less relevance. But the core had already been established. Intent, not implied, stated. Bailey closed the file. She did not replay it. Repetition would not strengthen its value. She forwarded it to Daniel with a single note: "Confirmed. Proceed with sequence." His response came within minutes: "Understood. We'll integrate at the appropriate stage." Appropriate stage. The phrase carried weight. It meant the audio would not be used immediately, not as an opening, not as a reaction. It would be introduced when the structure around it could support its impact without distortion. Bailey set her phone aside. Upstairs, the house remained unchanged. Kai moved through his routine with the same outward confidence. He spoke on calls, responded to messages, maintained the appearance of control. If there was any awareness of risk, it had not yet reached the surface. Bailey did not look for signs of it. She did not need to. The process was no longer dependent on his perception. Later that afternoon, she met with Daniel again. This time, the folder on the table was thicker. "We've integrated the audio into the sequence," Daniel said, opening the file. "It supports motive, but we're not relying on it as primary evidence." Bailey nodded. "Foundation first," she said. "Exactly," Daniel replied. Medical records establish context. Financials establish behavior. The audio confirms intent. He turned a page. There's also the matter of corporate exposure, he added. What he said about Richard introduces a potential conflict. Bailey considered that. It remains indirect, she said. For now. For now, Daniel agreed. But once it's on record, it expands the scope. Bailey did not respond immediately. Her focus remained on alignment. If we introduce it after financials, she said, the connection will be clear without being overstated. Daniel watched her for a moment, then nodded. That's the right sequence. The meeting concluded with no deviation from plan. Everything remained controlled, measured, deliberate. That evening, Bailey returned home to find Kai in the living room. He looked up as she entered. There's been some movement, he said. Bailey set her bag down. In what sense? My attorney mentioned your side is preparing something, Kai replied, more detailed than expected. Bailey met his gaze. That's standard. Kai studied her. It doesn't feel standard, he said. It feels extended. Bailey did not correct him. Then your expectations may need adjusting, she said. The response was calm, uninformative. Kai exhaled. I told you this didn't have to escalate, he said. Bailey's expression remained unchanged. And I told you it would proceed appropriately. There was a pause. Kai shifted his stance as though recalibrating. You're bringing in things that don't belong in this, he said. It's unnecessary. Bailey considered the statement. What specifically do you believe does not belong? She asked. Kai hesitated. It was brief, but it was there. Context, he said finally. History. It complicates things. Bailey held his gaze. Accuracy is not complication, she said. The distinction settled between them. Kai looked away first. That's not how this works, he said. It's about resolution. Bailey did not raise her voice. Resolution requires clarity, she replied. Kai did not respond immediately. The silence extended. Not uncomfortable, but definitive. He turned and moved toward the kitchen. The conversation ended without conclusion. Bailey remained where she was. Moments later, her phone vibrated. A message from Daniel. We've secured the second file. Same source cluster. Additional corroboration. Bailey read the message once. Then she typed her response. Hold. Integrate later. She set the phone down. Across the room, Kai moved with less certainty than before. The rhythm of his actions had shifted. Subtle but noticeable. He was adjusting, not yet aware of what he was adjusting to. Bailey did not observe him directly. Her attention remained on the structure she had been building. The audio had added a layer, not the foundation, but reinforcement. Intent once documented changes the interpretation of everything that surrounds it. Statements are no longer isolated. Actions are no longer ambiguous. Patterns become evidence. Bailey understood this. She had designed systems that relied on it. Now she was applying it, not to control, not to retaliate, but to reveal. Kai believed the narrative was still his to shape. Bailey allowed that belief to remain intact. For now, it served its purpose. Because when the sequence completed, when each element aligned with the next, the outcome would not depend on argument. It would depend on structure. And structure, once established, does not negotiate. It stands. The notice reached Richard Carter on a Tuesday afternoon, folded into a sequence of routine communications that rarely required more than a glance. Subject: Internal Audit Data Access and Financial Compliance Review. He opened it without concern. Audits were not unusual. They came and went often with little consequence for those who followed procedure and avoided unnecessary attention. Richard had built his career on both. He read the document once, noting the departments listed the timelines, outlined the expectations, defined in language that emphasized cooperation over alarm. His department was included. He did not react immediately. Instead, he read it again. There was nothing in the wording that suggested accusation. No individual names. No specific incidents referenced. The scope was broad, encompassing multiple divisions and functions. It was on its surface procedural. But something about the timing unsettled him. Not enough to create alarm, just enough to create awareness. He printed the document and placed it on his desk, aligning it with the edge as he always did. His workspace remained as it had been for years, ordered, predictable, resistant to disruption. Across the office, conversations continued as usual. Phones rang, emails were answered. The rhythm of the day did not shift. Richard returned to his work. He moved through reports, reviewed data, signed off on approvals that required his attention. Each action followed a sequence he had performed countless times before. But the notice remained in his peripheral vision. By late afternoon, he requested access logs from the previous quarter. Not as a reaction, as a precaution. The request did not raise concern. It fell within his authority. The data arrived within the hour. He reviewed it methodically. User IDs, timestamps, access points. At first, nothing stood out. Then patterns began to form. Entries that extended beyond standard hours. Queries that reached into areas not directly tied to his department's function. Not frequent enough to trigger automatic flags, but consistent enough to be noticeable when viewed in sequence. Richard leaned back slightly in his chair. He did not draw conclusions. He cross-referenced. The user ID associated with the irregular access was his. He frowned not in confusion, but in concentration. He had accessed those systems, but not in the way the logs suggested. The timestamps aligned with times he had been at home, evenings when he had not logged in, days when his activity had been limited to routine tasks. He reviewed the entries again. The pattern held. Indirect access, authorized, but not initiated. Richard closed the file. He did not escalate the matter, not yet. Instead, he considered the possibility he had not allowed himself to consider before. Kai. The thought arrived without resistance. It did not require justification. It required verification. That evening, Richard returned home earlier than usual. The house was quiet when he entered. Eleanor was in the sitting room reviewing a set of invitations with the same attention she applied to every detail. "You're early," she said without looking up. "Work shifted," Richard replied. He placed his briefcase near the door and moved further into the room. "Is Kai home?" he asked. "Upstairs," Eleanor said. Why Richard did not answer immediately. "I'll speak with him," he said. Eleanor glanced up, then her expression neutral but attentive. "About work," Richard replied. The word carried enough weight to end the inquiry. He moved toward the stairs. Kai was in his room, seated at his desk, his phone in hand. He looked up as Richard entered. "Richard." "Hey," Kai said. "What's up?" Richard closed the door behind him. "I received an audit notice today," he said. Kai's expression did not change. "Those happen," he replied. "Routine." Richard stepped further into the room. "This one includes my department," he said. Kai nodded. "Still routine." Richard watched him. "There are access logs," he continued. "Irregular entries." Kai's posture shifted slightly, meaning my credentials were used outside standard parameters, Richard said. "Times I was not logged in." There was a pause. Short, controlled. Kai set his phone down. "You're saying someone used your access?" he asked. "I'm asking if you did," Richard replied. The directness of the question settled between them. Kai leaned back in his chair. "I've asked you about things before," he said. "Structure, changes, you've explained. That's not what I'm asking," Richard said. Kai exhaled. "It's not like I logged into anything," he said. You told me what I needed to know. Richard's gaze did not shift. And the access logs, he asked. Kai hesitated. This time, it was visible. I might have used your laptop once or twice, he said. Nothing serious. Just checking something. Richard did not respond immediately. He processed the statement not for what it admitted, but for what it implied. How many times, he asked. Kai looked away briefly. A few, he said. It's not a big deal. Richard stepped closer. It is, he said. You used my credentials to access systems you are not authorized to view. Kai shrugged. It's internal, he said. It's not like I took anything. Richard's voice remained steady. That's not the point. Kai stood then, the movement quick, defensive. You're overreacting, he said. Everyone does it. Richard did not raise his voice. No, he said. They don't. The room held the tension without release. Kai looked at him, searching for an angle that would reduce the weight of the moment. It was just to understand direction, he said. Where things are going. It helps. Richard's expression did not change. For what he asked. Kai did not answer immediately. The silence extended. Then he spoke. For opportunities, he said. Positioning. Richard absorbed the word. Positioning. He turned slightly as though recalibrating his understanding of the situation. This audit, he said more to himself than to Kai, will trace those logs. Kai's confidence wavered. It won't go that far, he said. Richard met his gaze again. It will, he said. The certainty in his tone was not dramatic. It was informed. Kai shifted his weight. What do you want me to do? He asked. Richard did not respond right away. He looked at his son not as a parent assessing behavior, but as someone evaluating consequence. Stop, he said. The word was simple, but it carried finality. Kai nodded, though the gesture lacked conviction. Fine, he said. I'll stop. Richard did not move. There may already be implications, he said. You need to understand that. Kai's expression tightened. It's not like anyone's watching that closely, he repeated. Richard held his gaze. They are now, he said. Downstairs, Bailey sat in the living room, her laptop open but untouched. She had received the audit notice earlier that day. Not through the same channel as Richard, through her own. She had reviewed it, confirmed its scope, and noted the departments included. She knew where it would lead, not because she had directed it, but because she understood how structures responded to pressure. Footsteps sounded on the stairs. Richard descended first. His posture was unchanged, but something in his movement had shifted. Awareness. He entered the living room and paused when he saw Bailey. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he nodded. Evening, he said. Good evening, Bailey replied. There was a brief silence. Not uncomfortable, but different. Richard seemed to consider something, then chose not to say it. He moved past her toward the kitchen. Moments later, Kai followed. His steps were less certain than before. He did not look at Bailey as he crossed the room. She did not call his attention. She returned to her laptop. The document remained open. She added a new entry. Event internal audit notice issued. Department includes Richard Carter. Observation access irregularities anticipated. She saved the file. Then she paused. Not to reconsider, but to assess. The structures were aligning. Not visibly, not completely, but enough. Kai believed he was still operating within control. Richard had begun to see otherwise. Bailey remained where she had always been, observing, recording, waiting. Because when the sequence reached its point of convergence, the outcome would not require explanation. It would require acknowledgement. The first mediation session was scheduled without ceremony. No one announced it. No one prepared for it emotionally. It appeared on the calendar as a fixed point in a process that had already begun to move on its own terms. A conference room had been reserved, a mediator assigned, time allocated in precise blocks, as though the dissolution of a marriage could be measured in hours. Bailey arrived early, not to prepare, but to observe. The building was neutral glass walls, controlled lighting, a reception desk that separated personal matters from public space. She checked in, took a seat, and waited without distraction. Daniel Brooks joined her a few minutes later, carrying a folder that mirrored the structure of everything they had built. "Everything is in place," he said, taking the chair beside her. "We're not presenting everything today." Bailey nodded. "Foundation only." Daniel confirmed it with a brief glance. "Let them lead," he added. "They believe they're ahead." Bailey did not respond. Across the room, the elevator doors opened. Kai stepped out first. His posture was composed, his expression calibrated. He wore the same confidence he had carried into every interaction since filing. Behind him, Melissa Grant followed, her presence sharp, controlled, already focused on outcome. Kai noticed Bailey immediately. There was a pause in his step, brief but visible. He had expected something different, uncertainty perhaps, a sign that the process had unsettled her. He found none. Bailey met his gaze without expression. Then she looked away. The moment passed. Melissa approached Daniel with a professional nod. "Daniel," she said. "Melissa." They shook hands without warmth, without hostility. The exchange was procedural. The mediator arrived shortly after, introducing himself with a tone that suggested neutrality without engagement. He guided them into the conference room, outlining the structure of the session as they took their seats. "This is an opportunity," he said, "to resolve matters efficiently. We'll proceed in stages. Each side will have time to present, followed by discussion." Bailey listened, not to the words, to the sequence. Melissa began. She had positioned the case quickly, with clarity and intention. The narrative was consistent with the filing, Bailey as withdrawn dependent, no longer contributing to the marriage in a meaningful way. The language was refined, stripped of overt hostility, but structured to lead to the same conclusion: irrelevance. Kai sat beside her, silent, allowing the narrative to carry his position. Bailey did not interrupt. She did not react. She allowed the presentation to complete. When it was Daniel's turn, he did not begin with contradiction. He began with context. "Before we address the claims presented," he said, "we need to establish the timeline in which those claims exist." He opened the folder. During the period referenced in the petition, Bailey Carter was undergoing documented medical treatment. He slid a set of documents across the table. Verified, time-stamped, relevant to the characterization presented. Melissa glanced at the papers, her expression unchanged. "This does not negate the overall dynamic," she said. Daniel nodded. "It clarifies it," he replied. Bailey remained still. Her presence did not shift. The mediator reviewed the documents briefly, then looked up. "This adds context," he said. Melissa adjusted her position. "Context does not change outcome," she said. "The marriage has deteriorated. That is not in dispute." Daniel did not challenge the statement. "Nor is it the focus," he said. "We are addressing representation." The distinction settled into the room. Kai shifted slightly in his chair. It was subtle, but Bailey saw it. Daniel continued. "We will not present all materials today," he said. "Only those necessary to correct the current record." Melissa's gaze sharpened. "Is there additional information we should be aware of?" she asked. Daniel closed the folder. "At the appropriate stage," he said. The phrase landed with precision. It did not reveal. It suggested. Kai looked toward Melissa, then back at Daniel. "What does that mean?" he asked. Daniel did not answer him directly. It means we proceed in sequence, he said. The mediator intervened, redirecting the conversation toward logistical matters. Asset division, timelines, next steps. Bailey participated minimally. She responded when addressed. She clarified when necessary. She did not expand. Across the table, Kai's confidence remained, but it had shifted. Not diminished, adjusted. He was recalculating, looking for alignment that no longer held. At one point, Melissa attempted to reassert control. If the goal is efficiency, she said we should focus on resolution rather than extended examination. Daniel acknowledged the point. Efficiency requires accuracy, he replied. The conversation circled without conclusion. That was expected. Mediation at this stage was not about agreement. It was about positioning. After 90 minutes, the session concluded. No decisions were made, no agreements reached. But something had changed, not in what was said, in what was no longer assumed. Outside the conference room, Kai approached Bailey. "We're making this harder than it needs to be," he said. Bailey turned to face him. "Harder for whom?" she asked. Kai hesitated. "For both of us," he said. Bailey considered the statement. "Then proceed accordingly," she replied. Kai exhaled. "You don't need to bring everything into this," he said. "It's unnecessary." Bailey held his gaze. "Accuracy is necessary," she said. The repetition was intentional. Kai looked away first. Melissa called his name, drawing him back into alignment. He followed her without another word. Daniel stood beside Bailey. "They felt it," he said quietly. Bailey did not ask what he meant. She already knew. The shift, Daniel added. "They're aware something is coming." Bailey nodded once. "Then we maintain sequence," she said. Daniel closed his folder. "Next stage," he said. They left the building without urgency. The city continued as it always did, unchanged, unaware. But Bailey understood that the structure had moved. Not visibly, not completely, but enough. Kai believed the process was still within reach. Bailey allowed that belief to remain. For now. Because when the next stage began, when the remaining pieces were introduced, the outcome would not depend on persuasion. It would depend on what had already been established. And what had been established was no longer aligned with his version of events. The email arrived at 6:42 a.m., before most of the building had settled into its day. Subject: mandatory compliance briefing. Attendance required. Richard Carter read it at his kitchen table, the light from the window still thin. The house quiet in a way that made each word feel more deliberate. The message was brief. No elaboration. No room for interpretation. Attendance was not optional. He finished his coffee without tasting it and printed the email, folding it once before placing it in his briefcase. Eleanor moved through the kitchen behind him, her routine uninterrupted. "Another early day?" she asked. "Yes," Richard replied. She did not press further. Routine questions received routine answers. That had always been enough. Upstairs, Kai's door remained closed. Richard left without waiting for him. The office felt different when he arrived. Not visibly. The same desks, the same people, the same quiet hum of systems beginning their work. But there was a tension beneath it, subtle and unspoken. The kind that emerges when a process has already begun, and those within it are only just becoming aware. He made his way to the conference room listed in the email. Several colleagues were already seated. Conversations were low-controlled, as though each person understood that speculation carried risk. Richard took a seat near the middle of the table, placing his briefcase beside him. At precisely 7:30, the door closed. A representative from compliance stood at the front. Not someone Richard interacted with regularly, but familiar enough to recognize authority. "Thank you for attending," the man began. "This session addresses recent findings related to data access and financial compliance. The language was neutral. The tone was not. Richard listened without interruption. The presentation moved methodically. Logs were displayed, access patterns outlined, not names not yet, but structures, sequences, the way data moved when it was used as intended, and the way it moved when it was not. Richard recognized the patterns. He had seen them in his own review. The difference now was scale. What he had noticed in isolation was being presented as part of a larger framework. Multiple departments, multiple points of access, a system responding to pressure in ways that revealed its weaknesses. Then the slide changed. User identifiers appeared, not all at once, one at a time. Richard's was among them. There was no immediate reaction in the room. No one spoke. The representative continued. These entries reflect access outside standard parameters, he said. Timing and scope inconsistent with assigned roles. Richard's attention did not shift. He did not look around. He did not need to. The information was clear. The implication controlled. "We are conducting a full review," the representative added. "At this stage, we are establishing patterns, not assigning intent." Richard understood the distinction. It was procedural. It was also temporary. The meeting concluded without questions, not because none existed, because none were safe to ask. As the room began to clear, Richard remained seated for a moment longer. Not in hesitation, in assessment. Then he stood, collected his briefcase, and left. Back at his desk, he opened his email. A second message waited. Subject, follow-up, individual review, scheduling. His name was listed. Time 2:00 p.m. He read it once, then closed the window. There was nothing to respond to. The process would proceed regardless. Across the city, Bailey Carter read the same briefing, not in a conference room, on a secured device through a channel that did not require attendance to confirm authority. She reviewed the presentation in full, not for content, but for alignment. The patterns matched what she had already documented. The scope extended slightly beyond her initial assessment, but not unexpectedly. She noted the timing. The sequence held. Her phone vibrated. Daniel Brooks. "They've moved to identification," he said without preamble. I saw Bailey replied. "There will be individual reviews," he added. "This intersects with our timeline." Bailey considered that. "Then we maintain position," she said. For now, Daniel agreed. "But we need to be prepared to integrate." Bailey did not respond immediately. Her focus remained on structure. "Not yet," she said. "Let their process define its own scope." Daniel paused. "That increases exposure," he said. "It clarifies it," Bailey replied. The distinction settled. "Understood," Daniel said. "We'll hold." The call ended. Bailey closed the file and set the device aside. Nothing in her environment reflected the movement underway. The same room, the same light, the same quiet. But the structure had shifted. Not dramatically, but enough. At 2:00 p.m., Richard entered the review room. It was smaller than the conference space, more contained, designed for focus rather than presentation. 2 individuals were present, one from compliance, one from legal. Richard took his seat. The questions began without introduction. "Can you confirm your access patterns over the past 3 months?" "Yes." "Have you shared your credentials with any third party?" "No." The answers were precise, controlled. "Are you aware of any unauthorized use of your access?" Richard paused. "Not long, but long enough to register." "Yes," he said. The response shifted the tone. "Please elaborate," the legal representative said. Richard met his gaze. "My son may have used my device," he said, "without full understanding of scope." The words were chosen carefully, not to conceal, not to accuse, to define. "Was he authorized?" the compliance officer asked. "No." "Was any information extracted, I cannot confirm, Richard replied. The legal representative made a note. This will require further review, he said. I understand, Richard replied. The session continued. Details, clarifications, boundaries. Richard answered each question without deviation. He did not speculate. He did not defend beyond what could be supported. When it ended, he left the room without looking back. That evening, the house felt different. Not in appearance, in weight. Kai was already home when Richard entered. He stood in the living room, phone in hand, his posture less certain than before. They contacted me, Kai said. Richard set his briefcase down. I know, he replied. Kai watched him. What did you tell them, he asked. Richard met his gaze. The truth, he said. The words settled between them. Kai exhaled. It's not that simple, he said. Richard did not raise his voice. It is he replied. Silence followed. Not empty, defined. Bailey sat nearby her laptop, open, her attention directed toward the screen. She did not look up. She did not need to. The structure had reached another point of alignment, not visible to all, but present. And once present, it would not recede. Kai believed the situation could still be managed. Richard had begun to understand otherwise. Bailey remained where she had always been, observing, recording, waiting, because when the next stage began, the distinction between narrative and record would no longer be abstract. It would be enforced. The realization did not arrive for Richard Carter all at once. It moved in layers. The first had been the audit. The second, the questions that followed. The third came quietly without announcement, as a pattern he could no longer ignore. It began with a signature. Late that evening, after the conversation with Kai had dissolved into silence, Richard returned to his study. The room was unchanged shelves. Aligned papers ordered the same controlled environment he had maintained for years. He opened his laptop. Not to work, to verify. The internal portal required multiple levels of authentication. He completed them without hesitation, navigating to a section he had accessed many times before, though never with this particular intent. Board-level documentation. Not something he was authorized to modify, but enough to review. He moved through the records carefully, not searching for anything specific at first, just observing, allowing the information to present itself without assumption. Then he saw it. A name. Not prominent, not emphasized, but present. Bailey Carter. He did not react immediately. He read the document again. The structure was layered as most corporate ownership models were. Parent entities, subsidiaries, holding companies designed to distribute control across multiple legal frameworks. But the connection was there. Clear, verifiable. He leaned back in his chair. The room remained silent. Nothing in the environment acknowledged what had just shifted. Richard closed the file, then reopened it. Not because he doubted what he had seen, because he needed to confirm that he had understood it correctly. The result did not change. Bailey Carter, not an employee, not an external consultant. Ownership, indirect but decisive. He sat for a long moment, the implications moving through him, without resistance, without denial. Memory adjusted itself, conversations revisited, moments reinterpreted. Every dinner, every silence. Every time Bailey had been spoken about as though she were peripheral, unnecessary, replaceable. He saw them now with clarity that had not been available before. Not because the information had been hidden, because he had not known to look. Upstairs, the house remained still. Kai's footsteps moved intermittently, the pattern less confident than before. Eleanor's voice carried faintly from another room, measured unaware. Richard remained where he was, not moving, not speaking, understanding. Across the house, Bailey sat in the living room, her laptop open, her attention fixed on the screen. She did not need to check the internal portal to know what Richard had seen. The structure had reached a point where discovery was no longer preventable, not through concealment, through sequence. Her phone vibrated. A message from Daniel. He's accessed board-level records. Bailey read it once. Expected, she replied. Do we adjust? Daniel asked. Bailey considered the question. No, she said. We continue. There was a pause before his response. Understood. Bailey set the phone aside. Nothing in her posture changed. No shift in expression. No acknowledgement of the moment beyond the necessary. Upstairs, a door opened. Footsteps descended. Richard entered the living room. He paused when he saw her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he approached. Bailey, he said. She looked up. Yes, there was no tension in her voice. No indication that anything had changed. Richard stood a few feet away. His posture controlled, his expression measured. I reviewed some documents tonight, he said. Bailey held his gaze. I see. The response did not invite explanation. It did not require it. Richard studied her. Not as he had before, not as someone observing a member of his household, as someone reassessing position. You're connected to the company, he said. It was not a question. Bailey did not look away. Yes. The confirmation settled without emphasis. Richard exhaled slowly. Why didn't you say anything, he asked. Bailey considered the question. Because it was not relevant, she said. The answer was precise, not dismissive, defined. Richard absorbed it. Not relevant, he repeated. Bailey did not elaborate. Richard looked away briefly, then back at her. My position there, he began, then stopped. Bailey did not interrupt. Does this affect it? He asked. The question carried more weight than the others. Not as an employee, as a man who had built something over time. Bailey's response came without delay. Your position is defined by your actions, she said. Not by her, not by the structure, by him. Richard nodded once. The clarity was not comforting, but it was sufficient. There was another pause. Then he spoke again. Kai doesn't know, he said. Bailey's expression did not change. No. Richard considered that. He will, he said. Yes. The inevitability of it did not require elaboration. Richard shifted slightly as though adjusting to a new balance. I should have seen it, he said more to himself than to her. Bailey did not respond. Not because she disagreed, because the statement did not require correction. Richard looked at her again. This changes things, he said. Bailey met his gaze. It clarifies them, she replied. The distinction held. Richard nodded. Then he stepped back, not retreating, repositioning. I have a review scheduled tomorrow, he said. Bailey acknowledged it with a slight nod. I'm aware. He paused. You knew, he said. Bailey did not confirm. She did not deny. She simply held his gaze. The answer was contained in that silence. Richard exhaled once more. Then he turned and left the room. Upstairs, Kai remained unaware. Not of the audit, not of the legal process, but of this shift. Bailey returned her attention to the screen. The document remained open. The entries complete. The sequence intact. She added one more line. Event Richard Carter accessed ownership structure. Outcome awareness established. She saved the file. Then she paused, not to reconsider, to assess. The structure had reached another point of convergence. Not explosive, not visible, but irreversible. Kai believed he was still operating within a system he understood. Richard now knew he was not. Bailey remained where she had always been. Not above, not below, within. And from that position, The next stage would not require revelation, only confirmation. The hearing was not public. It took place in a room designed for precision rather than spectacle. Wood-paneled walls, a long table-controlled light that removed distraction instead of adding to it. There were no observers beyond those required. No audience to absorb reaction. No space for performance. That was what made it effective. Bailey arrived with Daniel Brooks at exactly the time assigned. She carried nothing in her hands. No visible documents. No preparation that needed to be displayed. Everything that mattered had already been organized, verified, and submitted through the channels that gave it weight. Kai arrived moments later with Melissa Grant. He looked composed, not confident in the way he had been before, but controlled. As if he understood now that the process had moved beyond tone, beyond perception. Still, there was something in his posture that suggested he believed there was room left to adjust the outcome. Melissa carried the file. Structured, complete. Built on the same narrative she had introduced from the beginning. The hearing began without introduction. Procedural matters were addressed first. Identification, scope, confirmation of submissions. The language was precise, stripped of anything unnecessary. Then the sequence began. Melissa spoke first. She returned to the foundation of her argument: deterioration of the marriage incompatibility, the inability to maintain a shared life. She did not rely on the earlier language as heavily now. The characterization of Bailey had softened slightly, adjusted to account for the documentation already presented. It was no longer aggressive. It was careful. Kai remained silent beside her. Bailey did not look at him. She focused on the structure of the room. Daniel responded when it was his turn. He did not raise his voice. He did not alter his tone. He began exactly where they had planned. With respect to the characterization presented, he said, "We will rely on the documentation already submitted." He did not repeat it. He did not need to. Further, he continued, "We will introduce additional materials that clarify the intent behind that characterization." He opened the file. The first set of documents was financial, bank records, transaction logs, dates aligned in sequence presented without commentary. No interpretation offered, no conclusions stated. Just movement. Kai's attention shifted. It was subtle, but visible. Melissa reviewed the documents quickly, her expression controlled. "These do not directly relate to the dissolution," she said. Daniel did not respond immediately. "They relate to representation," he said. The distinction returned. The hearing officer reviewed the records. "Please clarify relevance," he said. Daniel nodded. "These transactions establish a pattern of financial movement not disclosed in the initial filing," he said. "They contradict the assertion of transparency and stability presented by the petitioner." Melissa interjected. "There is no evidence of impropriety," she said. "Only movement." Daniel acknowledged the statement. "Correct," he said, "and that movement will be contextualized." He closed the file. Then he paused. The moment was intentional. "Sequence. Next," he said, "we submit an audio recording." The room did not react outwardly, but the shift was immediate. Melissa's posture changed. Kai's expression tightened. The file was entered, verified, accepted. Daniel did not summarize it. He allowed it to play. Kai's voice filled the room, clear, unfiltered. "It's about framing it right. If she looks dependent, everything else falls into place." The words did not require emphasis. They carried their own weight. Bailey remained still, her expression unchanged. Ethan's voice followed. "And the weight thing." Kai's response, "It helps. People see it and fill in the rest." Silence settled after the recording ended. Not the absence of sound, the presence of understanding. Melissa spoke first. "The context of this recording is unclear," she said. "It does not establish." Daniel did not interrupt. He waited. Then he responded. "The context is verified," he said. "Time-stamped, authenticated. It aligns with the period in which the petitioner's characterization was formed and presented." The hearing officer looked toward Kai. "Do you dispute the recording?" he asked. Kai did not answer immediately. The hesitation was brief, but it existed. "No," he said. The word was quiet, but final. The room adjusted, not visibly, but structurally. Daniel continued. "The petitioner's statements demonstrate intent to construct a narrative based on perception rather than fact," he said. "That narrative has been used to support legal claims within this proceeding." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Melissa shifted again. "This does not alter the fundamental issue," she said. "The marriage has ended." Bailey did not look at her. Daniel nodded. "We do not dispute that," he said. "We are addressing the basis upon which it has been presented." The hearing officer reviewed the documents again. Then he looked up. "Is there additional material?" he asked. Daniel paused. Then he spoke. "One final clarification," he said. He did not open a file. He did not present a document. He simply stated it. "The respondent, Bailey Carter, holds ownership interest in the corporate entity referenced in prior testimony." The words did not rise. They settled. Kai looked at Bailey for the first time since the hearing began. Not fully, but enough. There was no expression to read. No reaction to interpret. Just recognition. Melissa remained still. The hearing officer made a note. "This has been disclosed in the appropriate filings?" he asked. "Yes," Daniel replied. The officer nodded. Then he returned to the documents. No further questions were asked on that point. Not because it lacked significance, because its significance was self-evident. The hearing continued briefly. Procedural clarifications, next steps, nothing that altered the structure already established. When it concluded, there was no announcement, no declaration, just an end. Chairs shifted, files closed, people stood. Kai remained seated for a moment longer. Then he stood as well. Outside the room, the hallway was quiet. Bailey stepped out first, Daniel beside her. They did not speak immediately. They did not need to. Behind them, Kai exited with Melissa. He stopped, not close enough to address her, not far enough to ignore her. "Bailey," he said. Her name carried differently now, not as a reference, as recognition. She turned. Yes, the response was unchanged. Kai looked at her, searching for something, an explanation, a reaction, anything that would restore the structure he had been operating within. He found none. "You should have told me," he said. Bailey considered the statement. About what she asked, Kai hesitated. The answer, once simple, no longer held. He did not respond. Bailey waited. Not for him, for the moment to complete itself. When it did not, she turned back. Daniel spoke quietly as they walked. "It's done," he said. Bailey did not look back. "Yes," she replied. Behind them, Kai remained where he was, not moving, not speaking, understanding. Not all at once, but enough. After the hearing, nothing ended immediately. There was no single moment where consequences arrived in full. Instead, they unfolded in measured intervals, each one carrying a weight that did not need to be announced to be understood. Kai Carter felt it first in the silence. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of assumption. Conversations no longer moved around him with the same ease. Messages took longer to arrive. Responses, when they came, were shorter, less certain. Melissa Grant adjusted her tone in their follow-up meeting. "We proceed carefully from here," she said, reviewing the updated posture of the case. The focus shifts to resolution, not argument. Kai listened, but the words did not align with the structure he had been relying on. Resolution on what terms, he asked. Melissa met his gaze. Terms that reflect the current record, she said. The phrasing was precise. It did not offer comfort. It defined reality. Kai leaned back in his chair. The file in front of him no longer represented leverage. It represented exposure. Meanwhile, Anasta Bailey Carter did not adjust her pace. Her days remained structured. Her actions remained aligned with the process she had set in motion long before the hearing. She met with Daniel Brooks only when necessary, reviewed documents with the same attention she had applied from the beginning, and avoided any movement that could be interpreted as reaction. Control for her was not visible. It was maintained. At the company, the audit reached its next phase. Richard Carter was called in again. This time, the questions were narrower, more precise. The logs had been reviewed in full, the access points mapped, the indirect usage identified with greater clarity. There was no longer a question of whether his credentials had been used, only how. Richard did not shift his position. He answered as he had before, truthfully, without extension, without defense beyond what could be supported. He did not reference Bailey. He did not need to. The structure now existed independently of personal connection. After the session, he returned to his desk. He sat for a moment, his hands resting on the surface, the same place they had rested countless times before. But the meaning had changed. His role, once defined by stability, now carried uncertainty. Not because of Bailey, because of Kai. That distinction remained clear in his mind. That evening, he returned home later than usual. The house was quiet. Bailey sat in the living room, her laptop open, her posture unchanged. Richard paused at the threshold. "Bailey," he said. She looked up. Yes, there was no tension, no shift, just acknowledgement. Richard stepped closer. "I've completed the review process," he said. Bailey waited. "They've identified the access points," he continued. "They're determining the extent." Bailey nodded slightly. "I understand." Richard studied her. "You didn't initiate this," he said. It was not a question. Bailey held his gaze. "No." The answer settled without elaboration. Richard nodded. "That matters," he said. Bailey did not respond. Not because she disagreed, because the statement required no addition. There was a pause. Then Richard spoke again. "Kai will face consequences," he said. Bailey's expression did not change. "Yes." The certainty in her voice was not sharp, it was factual. Richard exhaled. "I should have intervened earlier," he said. Bailey considered the statement. "Intervention requires recognition," she replied. The distinction was not accusatory. It was structural. Richard accepted it. He nodded once, then stepped back. "I'll handle what I can," he said. Bailey did not ask what that meant. She did not need to. Upstairs, Kai moved through the house with a different rhythm. Less certainty, more awareness. He had received notice from his firm earlier that day. Not termination, not yet, but review. Internal, formal. The language mirrored the audit at Richard's company. Precise, neutral, unavoidable. He stood in his room reading the message again. The words did not change, only their weight. He understood now that the situation extended beyond the divorce, beyond the hearing, into areas he had not accounted for. He descended the stairs slowly. Bailey remained in the living room. She did not look up as he entered. "Bailey," he said. She turned. Yes, the same response. Unchanged. Kai stood there for a moment, the distance between them defined not by space, but by everything that had shifted. "I didn't know," he said. The words were quiet, not defensive, not explanatory, just stated. Bailey held his gaze. About what she asked. Kai hesitated. The answer, once clear, now required definition. The company, he said. Your position. Bailey considered him. It was not relevant to your actions, she said. The response did not accuse. It clarified. Kai looked away briefly. It would have changed things, he said. Bailey did not agree. It would not have changed what you chose to do, she replied. The statement settled. Kai did not argue. He did not have a counterpoint that held. There was another pause. Then he spoke again. I can fix this, he said. The words carried less certainty than before. Bailey watched him. This is not a situation that requires fixing, she said. It requires resolution. The distinction returned. Kai exhaled. You're not even angry, he said. Bailey's expression remained steady. Anger is not relevant, she replied. Kai studied her, searching, still, for something, a reaction, a shift, anything that would confirm that the structure between them still held. It did not, he nodded once. Then he turned. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just movement. Toward the stairs. Toward what remained of his position, Bailey returned her attention to her laptop. The document remained open. The entries complete. The sequence intact. She added one final note for the day. Event post-hearing interaction. Observation petitioner acknowledges lack of awareness. Outcome no change in position. She saved the file. Then she paused. Not to reconsider, to conclude. The structure had reached its final stage. Not in declaration, in completion. What remained was formal, procedural, inevitable. And once complete, it would not require validation. It would stand on its own. The final resolution did not arrive with a statement. It arrived as a document, filed, reviewed, approved. No raised voices, no visible reaction. Just a sequence completed the way it had been built from the inside, with precision without excess. Bailey Carter read the terms once. Then she read them again. Not because she expected them to change, because she confirmed everything she had already established. The language was clear, the structure balanced. The claims that had once defined the case, dependency, instability, irrelevance, were no longer present. Not disputed in tone, removed through contradiction. What remained was dissolution. Nothing more, nothing less. She closed the file. Across the table, Daniel Brooks waited. It aligns, he said. Bailey nodded. Yes. There was no relief in her expression, no satisfaction, just acknowledgement. Daniel closed his folder. Then we finalize, he said. Bailey did not hesitate. Yes. The signatures were completed in sequence. Hers, then his. Kai Carter signed without looking up. The movement was controlled, but different. Not the confidence he had carried at the beginning. Not the certainty that had shaped his decisions. Something quieter, more exact. When it was done, the document was collected, processed, removed. There was no ceremony attached to the end, only confirmation. Outside the building, the day continued without interruption. People moved through their routines. Conversations began and ended without awareness of what had just concluded inside. Bailey stepped into the light without pause. She did not look back. Behind her, Kai remained for a moment longer. Not because there was anything left to do, because there was something left to understand. Not all at once, but enough. At the company, the audit reached its conclusion within the same week. Richard Carter received the final report in a closed session. The findings were precise. His credentials had been used without authorization. The extent had been limited. The responsibility defined. His role had not been reassigned, but it had been reviewed, adjusted, not as punishment, as correction. He accepted the outcome without resistance. There was no argument to make, no position to defend beyond what had already been established. After the session, he returned to his office. He stood for a moment beside his desk, the same desk he had occupied for years now, carrying a different weight. Not diminished, clarified. Later that evening, he returned home. The house was quieter than it had been in years. Not empty, but settled. Bailey was in the living room, her laptop closed, her posture unchanged. Richard paused when he saw her. "Everything is complete," he said. Bailey looked up. Yes. There was no question in her voice, no need for explanation. Richard stepped closer. "They've finalized the report," he said. "My position remains." Bailey nodded slightly. "I'm aware." Richard studied her. There was something in his expression now that had not been there before. Not regret, recognition. "I should have said something," he said. Bailey considered the statement. When she asked, Richard did not answer immediately. The question required more than a moment. "Earlier," he said finally. Bailey held his gaze. "Earlier would have required seeing it," she replied. The distinction remained consistent. Richard accepted it. He nodded once. "Take care," he said. Bailey inclined her head. "You too." The exchange ended without extension. Not because there was nothing more to say, because nothing more was required. Upstairs, Kai moved through the house quietly. Not avoiding, not engaging, simply existing within a space that no longer held the same structure. He paused at the top of the stairs, looked down. Bailey did not look up. She did not need to. He remained there for a moment. Then he turned, not away from her, but toward what remained of his direction. Bailey stood. She moved through the room with the same measured pace she had always maintained. She did not gather much. There was little to take. The things that mattered were not physical. At the door, she paused, not in hesitation, in completion. The house behind her remained unchanged. The same walls, the same arrangement. But its meaning had shifted. She stepped outside. The air was clear, unremarkable, exact. She closed the door without sound and walked. Not quickly, not slowly. Forward. There was no audience, no one to observe the moment, no one to assign it meaning beyond what it already held. Bailey did not look back. She did not need to confirm what had ended. She had already recorded it, structured it, understood it. What remained was not loss. It was absence, defined, clean. And within that absence, there was space. Not for reaction, for continuation. Elsewhere, Kai sat alone. The documents were gone. The structure he had relied on no longer held, not because it had been taken, because it had been revealed. And in that revelation, there was no argument left to make. Only recognition, late, but exact. Richard remained in his study. The same room, the same order, but with a different understanding of what he had chosen not to see. The realization did not demand action. It required acknowledgement. And that finally had arrived. Bailey continued forward. Not as someone who had won, not as someone who had taken, but as someone who had maintained. Position, clarity, control, without volume, without spectacle. The structure had completed itself, and in its completion, it required nothing more. There are moments in life that do not announce themselves when they happen. They don't come with raised voices or visible turning points. They arrive quietly, often misunderstood in real time, and only later reveal the weight they carried. What Bailey chose was not silence out of weakness, but silence with direction. Not avoidance, but timing. Some people believe that strength must be seen to exist, that it must speak loudly, react quickly, and prove itself in the moment. But there is another kind of strength, the kind that observes, that records, that waits until the truth no longer needs to be argued, only shown. What happened in this story was not about revenge. It was about alignment, about allowing actions to meet their consequences without interference, without distortion. And sometimes the most powerful ending is not one where someone is brought down, but one where someone simply walks away unchanged in who they are, but no longer where they were. If this story stayed with you, I'd be curious to know where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. And if you believe that dignity doesn't always need to speak loudly to be real, you can stay with this channel for more stories like this, quiet, precise, and true, in their own way.